Hello people, today we're going to be doing a tier list for the faction Svalarheima Winter Force, or Infinity. We're going to go from S to D, ranking some of the units, what are their specialties, what can they do, and just some of my opinions on the very many units. Now, I have some experience in Svalarheima. I'm not a professional player or anything, but I do play them quite a bit, so I just wanted to go over some of the units, which ones I like, which ones I don't like, and yeah, just rank them. Basically, S is going to be a unit you're going to take almost every single time, while A is a unit that you can build around and it could be a second option. B is more of a unit that you can put and sometimes you will see them being run, but it's really not necessary to have a good list. C is more of a niche unit, something that you'll take just to surprise your opponent and display something different than what people are usually doing. Now, D is a unit I wouldn't consider taking most of the time, and I wouldn't recommend it. It's usually bad, and there's usually better options that strictly outclass it compared to what's available. Now, let's get into some of the units. Now, the first unit we're going to look at is the Fusilier. Now, for the Humble Fusilier, you'll see they have Ballistic Skill 12, which is pretty high for a basic troop, and this is going to be your basic infantry you're going to pretty much run in almost every list. And comparatively to other factions, the Fusilier is pretty decent and pretty good at its job. Not only that, but it's super cheap. At 10 points for the basic model, it's pretty decent. And yeah. Now, what they do lack is they have pretty low willpower, and this is just a common thing across all Pan-Oceania factions, but that's not going to be a problem because they make up for that in their excellent shooting. Now, a heavy machine gun for 18 points and 1 SWC on a ballistic skill 12 core linkable unit is great, and it is great for the price, and especially for the SWC, because Svalarheima is a faction that really needs that SWC for other units. Grenade launcher is also a great choice. Missile launcher, I love taking the missile launcher because it serves as a hard ARO piece, and it really creates a trap for your opponent to kind of launch themselves at. Now, the multi-sniper rifle is also pretty decent, and I would also consider taking. Some of the time, I usually take the missile launcher, but sometimes you do want the sniper rifle, or if you already have a missile launcher, which we'll get to in a bit, maybe you'll want something that's a slightly longer range. The hacker is also good, and it's probably one of your best options. Now, Svalarheima doesn't have great hackers. It's probably one of the downsides of the faction, because all their stuff is whip 12, and they just kind of struggle in that kind of section. But this is probably one of your best choices that you'll get, so if you do want to run a hacker, this is probably where you want him to be in a pure fire team that can be protected. Forward Observer is pretty decent, Flash Pulse Deployable Repeater. The Paramedic, almost always take in a list. This I never run without. Now, the Lieutenant is interesting because it's probably one of the best lieutenants in the entire faction. Now, other choices you do have are pretty limited. I mean, you could take a Jotun, or Uma Sorensen is your lieutenant as well. That's something that I've seen. But the Fusilier Lieutenant is pretty decent, and you're probably going to take it in most of the lists. And overall, they're just a great unit, and you're probably going to run them in almost every list you make. So they're an S. And now, the Svalarheima Niece. Now, this unit is pretty cool. Now, it's very comparable to the Kamau from the Baruna faction. Like the Kamau, it has a profile with multi-sniper rifle, MSB2, and mimetism tree, and that is one of the best set of modifiers that you could have. Not only because it's a long range, it's also linkable in a fire team, and it's just a killer ARO piece, and even in the active turn it can do some pretty good damage. Now, the difference is that the Niece is slightly more expensive than the Kamau, which means it's a little harder to build around, but that's not saying that there isn't. The fire team section is pretty well built to support the Niece, and there's some really good options to kind of go with a fire team. And you could even build a core fire team of Nieces with the pure bonuses for a decent amount of points that you would think it would be more expensive for. Now, I would probably take most of these. I would not take the Lieutenant. I think this is probably the weakest option, but almost every other option here is pretty good. But if I were to take one in any list, I think the Niece is one with the multi-sniper. Is something you would probably take in most lists, just to have it as like an arrow piece, or something to shoot at if your main shooter goes down. And yeah, for that, I think the Niece is going to be a A-tier unit because it is a great build-around unit that you can take as an alternative to your basic Fusilier fire teams, or even just as a specialist Harris team. They do pretty well. MSV2 and Mimetism is just great. Their only downside is that they're one wound and they have no shock immunity. so they're very easy to kill. But apart from that, you're getting a great shooter in this profile. The next unit we're going to look at is the Orc Troops. Now, the Orcs are pretty cool. They have some good movement, serviceable CC, great ballistic skills, but 14 is pretty good. Physical is alright. The willpower is, Pano willpower. Armor 4, BTS 3, 2 wounds. Now, most of these profiles you kind of want to glance over. I would say Orcs are kind of a thing that you normally don't take. Now, you could take them, you could build a niche around them. Sometimes I do like to take the heavy machine gun, and I think an interesting profile here is the Lieutenant with the heavy machine gun, because it's 1 SWC. The only downside is that if your opponent knows what they're playing up, and they know the faction, they're going to know that this is your Lieutenant, because it'll be quite obvious. But you can still take them. They're pretty good if you want a heavy machine gun in a heavy infantry body that's linkable in a Fusilier fire team. They do a pretty good job. Now, there's not a lot else to talk about them. I mean, they have firewalls, and I think the Fuhrback is a great profile for to take as like kind of an arrow piece, or just throw in a Fusilier fire team. But generally, you just don't really want to take them. You could definitely experiment with them, but they're kind of a niche unit where you have better options in the sectorial to really take and maximize. So for that reason, I think I'll put them in C tier, as they're kind of a niche choice. Now, the Knights are like the big brothers of the Orc troops. The Knight Hospitallers they're great. They don't have as much movement, but what they lack in movement, they make up in close combat potential, which is one of the biggest weaknesses of the Orc troops, is that their CC is decent, but it's not great. While 21 with martial arts level 2 really does make a difference if you ever get into a fist fight. Now, there's a lot of great profiles. I think the Doctor profile is really cool, especially at 33 points. You can put this, there's some scenarios where you want heavy infantry, and this will make a great filler for your beta fire teams. And a specialist, Whip 13 specialist in a heavy infantry body is quite useful. The only downside is that, of course, like the Orc, they're hackable, which makes them kind of rough to take around. The heavy machine gun is also great, and sometimes I would take them. Because of the beta fire team, it's really an interesting choice to kind of build around. And yeah, they're pretty good. I wouldn't always take them, but sometimes you do want to take them, and I've experimented with them, and I think they're pretty decent. So I'll leave them in the B tier. Now, Trauma Dogs are kind of a unit that I find a little useless in the faction. Now, maybe that's just how I play, but I usually just take Fusilier Paramedics, or the Night Hospitality Doctors, and you also have the Infirmers, which will usually be taken. And the main core of this is because Svalarheima is a faction that really likes to play around the fire teams, and in that kind of scenario, the Trauma Doc, which can't go into any fire teams for 14 points, is just like not as useful as something else that you could take. Now, if you really want to have the Doctor with the peripherals, you could definitely go for it, but I just wouldn't say it's as useful as the other ones. For that reason, I'm going to put the Trauma Doc in C tier. The Machinist is a great unit. Unlike the Trauma Doc, this is a unit that you can actually put into a fire team with the Niece, and because of that, they're surprisingly useful, because you could really build a pretty cheap ARO team with the Niece, or you could build a core around it, which makes it great. Not only that, but there's some units that you'll really want a Machinist for, like the Tags, and just building around something like the Jotun, or like some of the Oxbots or the Bulleteers or whatnot. They're just great, and I think they're much better than the Trauma Dog, although they do have other options that you can take that we'll get to. And for the Engineers, I'm probably going to gift them a B tier. Well, it seems like I'm missing the Machinist profile here, but they would go in a B tier in any case. That's where I would put them. Now, the Pathfinder Dronebot, it's okay. You can take him. I really think there's better options, especially with the link teams that you have access to, and the amount of wildcards and specialists that you can really take. It's kind of hard to justify it, especially when you're really not relying on hacking most of the time. Now, they are a cheap 6/4 moving specialist, so they can definitely be useful at times, but personally, I don't take them that often. And yeah, I mean, the sensor could be good as well. But for me, they are kind of a C tier unit. I wouldn't really take them that often, but sometimes they do turn out to be pretty useful. The Zero Dronebot, Total reaction bots. Now this is very opinionated. I feel like some people do like these and they take a lot of them. Now me personally, these basic drone bots here with no like mimetism or any kind of modifiers like that, they do come with remote presence and immunity to shock. And if you're taking in machinists, you might as well try to squeeze one in if you have the points for it. But generally, I just don't take them because I think there's better options, and especially they're just not for me because they get shot down pretty easily. They do cause 1 SWC though, which is a benefit. Now the Clipper drone bot in Svalarheima is often for me kind of useless. Sometimes it does happen where my hacker does get a spotlight off, and then I can use the Clipper drone bot. But anytime I'm taking it, it's not that great because you're not really relying on your hackers to be that useful. So for that reason, the missile launcher is kind of just all right, and it's definitely a faction that doesn't really rely on this kind of thing. So yeah, I'd probably put them in a C tier. I mean, you can take them sometimes, but they're not as useful. They're definitely better in other sectorials, just not in Svalarheima. The Fugazi, well, now this is a unit that you're going to take in every list, and drone bots in general, they're just great. Every single one of the little flash pulse remotes are amazing in every faction they're in, and this one has a unit system as well, so yeah, this is obviously a must take, and you'll probably take this in almost every list. I can't think of a reason why not. Uh, they're just great at filling up points, giving you good orders. Now the Bulletier, here's a unit I love, personally. Because of the profile with the Spitfire, and the Heavy Shotgun is also great, but this specific profile I think is amazing. I mean, you have a Mimetism 6 piece, with movement of 6-4, and Ballistic Skill 12, and you can give them the modifiers to have marksmanship as well with the supported fire, if you bring an Evo bot. It's just great. It's a great unit, and it has a really good duo piece that we'll get to in this faction that you can take in other sectorials, but in this faction it also works pretty well. And yeah, I love this unit. Sometimes you build around it. You're not gonna take it in every list, but you can definitely take it. It's pretty cheap compared to your other options too, so you can build around it for a pretty decent price. So I will put it in A tier, kind of like the Nice, because you can really build around it and use it as your main shooting piece. And not only that, but you bring the specialist along, which I will get to. Now the Peacemaker armbots. These guys are a little expensive now. They used to be a little cheaper, but right now they're kind of expensive. They do come with the forward deployment and the op spot, which makes a great defensive piece, and you don't really have these kind of defensive pieces in Svalarheima, so sometimes you do want to take it, but for that price, it's rather expensive, but they're still good to take, and yeah, just have a repeater out there if you really do want to go for that hacker prey. I mean, you still have that kind of available for you, and with the heavy flamethrower and the heavy shotgun, it's just a killer combo. The Spitfire, you usually wouldn't take because if you want to go for the Spitfire, you would go for the Bulletier instead, but it's still a great unit. It's just not as powerful as it used to be. So for that, I probably put them in probably around the same as the Sierra. I might move the Sierra up. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Now, Paul bots, I mean, they're Paul bots. If you have the points for it, go. I usually don't take them because the specialists you do take in this list, like the machinists, are usually going to be linked. And if you take there's other engineer options, they're also linked. So the Paul bots end up kind of being useless in this faction. But they're still great. I mean, if you have the points for it, sometimes you will take a lot of drones, Sierra drone bots and whatnot, and you want the tags as well. So these become rather useful. I mean, they're okay. I wouldn't necessarily take them that often. Mule bots. Now the basic mule bot is kind of alright. I mean, I don't usually, unless you're playing a scenario that requires the baggage, I don't really see much use for them. They can refuel the Panzerfaust with some units like the Beast Hunter and whatnot, but they're just okay. Now the Evo hacker device is pretty good. I mean, 0.5 SWC, 15 points, it's a hacker, it can move 4-4, it's your basic Evo device, but what makes it good is that you can put assisted fire on the Bulletier, which makes it a killer of a unit, and if you're bringing the Sierra as well, you have another target for it. And just for that alone, I really do think they're a B tier. Now, the last profile, you probably never take the total reaction. If you do want a total reaction bot, you might as well just save up for the Sierra. And even then, I don't think the Sierra is that great, but it is usable. Now the Shaxx long arms. Now here we get to one of the first profiles where I just don't see why you would take them. Now, If I were trying to justify it, I would say it's because you could take a linkable portable autocannon, and that might be good. The Pulsar is alright, but the fact of the matter is you're getting a 1 wound model with 0 BTS and armor tree for this many points, no modifiers, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. It's only ballistic skill 12. There's just better things to do in the faction, so I just wouldn't take it. And for that reason, these are going to be our first D tier. Now the Jotun. This is a killer of a unit. Armor 10 is insane. It's just crazy. There's no higher armor in the entire game, and this means it can basically pling off like several weapons. Combi rifle is gone. Marksmanship rifle is gone. It can fling off grenades. It can fling off mines, and it's just great because of that. I mean, pistol's completely useless against it in cover. It it's just a unit that you take, and if your opponent doesn't have the tools for it, they just can't deal with it. And it's often has been the time where I've killed one of the only guns that can really deal with them, and they concede because they cannot deal with the Jotun. Now you could hack it, but it does have BTS 9, which is extremely high, so it's gonna basically take all their resources to try to finish this thing off. And yeah, sometimes you do get unlucky. That's the only sad part about the Jotun. But at 87 points, Panzerfaust, Heavy Flamethrower, Multi HMG, it's a killer combo, and it's a ballistic skin 15 pano tag, and it's just great. I probably wouldn't run a list without it that often, and 50% of your lists are going to include a Jotun because they are that good. And another reason why the engineer turns out to be better because you're going to be taking these guys so often. I would put the Jotun in the S tier just simply because of how useful they are and how often you'll see them. Now, Warcores. Warcores are great. I mean, they're 3-point filler. I love having them, and when I play factions that don't have them, it makes me sad because I keep trying to find a way to fill in those 3 points, but having them is great. It makes me happy being able to fill 3 points out like that. They're definitely like an A tier. I mean, maybe even an S tier, honestly. Just because 3 points for a Flash Pulse guy could be insane. You know, one time they stopped an F-matic in my game, so I think they deserve that S. Locust, now, this is a unit I think kind of sucks. Yes, it's got Mimetism -6, and Infiltration. Funnily, one of the only units in the entire sectorial with Infiltration. But even then, it's just alright at best. I mean, the only specialist option you have is the Hacker, and what makes it particularly not great is that it's a BTS tree, Willpower 13 Hacker, which is kind of on the lower side. For 34 points, or 32, this guy can just come up and just get absolutely blasted by another hacker, and you just lost this troop that cost that many points. If it was a little bit cheaper, maybe I consider taking it, but just having no kind of camouflage state, it really hurts it. It's only a 4-4, and yeah, I usually don't take this guy. I don't think he's worth it. It's just not worth taking. So for me, I would probably put it in the D tier, if I could find him. Okay, well, that's another model I will fill up later once I find. Now, the Noke, or the Noggin. This guy's just better Locust, in my opinion. It doesn't have Infiltration for deployment +8, but it's much cheaper. For the Specialist, 25 points for a Forward Observer Specialist with +8 deployment is just much better because unlike the Locust, it can't die to a hacking attack. Well, here, you have a guy who can go up, has a boarding shotgun, so can template somebody, has a Panzerfaust for long-range fire, and a Flash Pulse even. At Mimetism 6, he's just very useful, and even looking at the other profiles, I mean, the Hacker device is okay for the same reasons I talked about earlier, but the Spitfire can be very good. I mean, it's ballistic skill 12, but sometimes this comes as a surprise where your opponent doesn't have any MSB, and this suddenly becomes a pretty good piece to trade with. So the Spitfire, kind of an optional pick. The Forward Observer, if I have the points, I usually take it because it's a midfield specialist with Mimetism 6 for only 25 points, which is pretty decent. So this guy is a B tier for me. Now the Karhu, oh baby, this is the cream of the crop. This is why you play this faction. I love this unit. This is probably one of my favorite units in the entire game, so I'm a little bit biased, but MSB1, Climbing Plus, NCO, Mimetism, it just has so much going for it. And for the price, it's just amazing. I think the best profile is obviously the Fearback +1 burst with the AP mines, because this guy's a wild card. You can take him in any single fire team here, which means he's so useful. Because you could take him with normal Fusiliers and build a really cheap, 50-ish points behemoth of a unit with a tank destroying weapon. This thing is insane. It's just 4 shots on a Fearback with MSB1, Ballistic Skill 13, and Mimetism. It's just crazy. And then Climbing Plus, which means it could pretty much get anywhere. Mimetism, so it's harder to hit, and NCO, so it's cheaper to use on. It's just great. It's a great unit. I would take it in almost any list I take, and the Engineer is also good, and the Paramedic is also decent if you want to take a Karhu fire team. I usually have other options for these 2 roles, but the Fearback is something you will probably take, and sometimes you even take 2 of in some lists because they are just that good. The Karhu is a S tier unit in this faction, and it's probably one of the best units that you could play in Svalarheima. You would definitely take these guys. Now, the Barger, or the Bard. I'm not sure how to say it. Now, the Bard is great because it has Albedo. Now, Albedo, not always useful, but the times it is useful, it's very useful. It's like basically having like a Mimetism -6 and being able to have smoke, which Svalarheima or Pano in general just don't have. So suddenly the skill becomes a lot more useful. Super Dumb is great, Immunity to Shock, great ability, Ballistic Skill 13. And the profiles are pretty interesting. They have a lot of uses, like the sensor with Wild Parrots, the Mine Layer, Shock Mines, K1 Marksman Rifle. It's a pretty cool weapon, and it can come in clutch if you're fighting a tag. Forward observers are great. This heavy rocket launcher variant for 25 points is really killer, and it's a specialist as well, which I love. And yeah, I would generally consider... Now, the thing with the Bard is that it's hard to justify if you don't know who you're going up against, but if you're going up against somebody who's playing heavy MSB units, then this unit could be pretty useful. And yeah, I usually don't take him because he feels a niche very well, but when he does fill it, it's amazing. So you could bring him, and sometimes I do bring one guy into my team, but you could even do a fire team of them and kind of bring some in. They do fire team with the Orcs, which is also interesting if that's something you want to try to mess with, fire team with Orcs and Bard. Pretty expensive. I wouldn't recommend this. I think this is kind of overcosted and not as good as some of the other fire teams you can make, but it would be interesting to just kind of play around with. They're definitely a B tier unit just because they're so useful when they are. But when they aren't useful, they definitely fall down to a C tier. But when they are, they're B tier. So, and you couldn't go wrong with just taking one in your list. So for that reason, I'll put them there. Infirmers. Now, these are a cool unit. I mean, you have a monofilament CC weapon, which is huge. This thing is killer. Now, what you don't have is much survivability. It's an armor 2 unit with 1 wound, no shock immunity. This guy just dies. But for 25 points, what's great about him is that he could basically go in almost every fire team here. Like, you'll see he can go in a Fusilier fire team. More importantly, he can go in a Beta fire team, which makes his role a lot more useful. And yeah, as a doctor, I would say this is a better choice than the Trauma Doc just because he's linkable. I usually don't take him, but sometimes he's useful, and sometimes he's worth taking in your list. At 25 points for a doctor, you do have the Night Hospitaller as another option for him, if you have the points to spare. But if not, you can go wrong with this guy. But usually I just wouldn't take him because he's a little too expensive, but if you do have the points, you might as well go for it. I do think he's not as useful as some of the other units, but he does have his role from time to time. Yeah, I think he's kind of at C tier. Now, the Knight of Justice. This is such a cool unit. The model is amazing for this guy, and he's just your Pano Knight. He's a 6'2 beast with 23 CC and Ballistic Skill 14, BTS 9. What does that mean? It means that he's probably your best hacking choice in the faction, surprisingly. A Willpower 13, it is heavy infantry, but Willpower 13 BTS 9 hacker is nothing to scoff at. And he comes with these charges too, so he can play some of the secondary missions and some of the anti-material objectives. But yeah, the only problem with the Knight of Justice is that he's so expensive. I mean, this is just an expensive profile, especially when you compare it to other units in something like the Asawira in Hackaslam and whatnot. But in the case, he is a wild card, which gets him a lot of bonuses that he can basically go into a Fusilier Link team, or he can go into a Beta Link team with some of these units that are also useful. It just makes him really, really nice. And yeah, he's just expensive, but he really is worth the points if you do get him. I just won it because I feel like there's better options, and Svalarheima, where I have tested it, I think works best when you're stacking modifiers on your opponents, when you have Mimetism, when you have MSB, and yes, just having the cheaper units is great, but you cannot go wrong with the Knight of Justice, and you can definitely build around this guy and have him as your main fire piece. And Armor 5 is pretty decent, as well as the Willpower and BTS. Ballistic Skill 14 is amazing. Yeah. Now, the Lieutenant option I wouldn't take, because it might be obvious, unless you're taking a Yotum, people are going to know this is your Lieutenant because he's one of the only Lieutenants with Willpower 13, which makes him kind of obvious to take. And he can easily be isolated. I just wouldn't take him as a Lieutenant. Now, you do have the forward deployment one. A little too expensive for what it does, but sometimes you could have him. The missile launcher is interesting, but I think there's a better option for a missile launcher that I do want to talk about, and it might be a controversial opinion, but I do think the Knight of Justice is a solid B tier. If he was cheaper, he would definitely be like a must-take, but he just comes at a steep price point for what he does, but what he does is great. Richard Quinn. Now, Richard Quinn's an interesting model because you look at him, and he has a lot. He's a forward observer, he has MSB1, he has a shock marksman rifle, a breaker pistol with +1 burst, and he can be linked, he's a wild card, and a Fusilier, which means he can go in a pure fire team and still get the bonuses. Now that's great. 24 points for that? Amazing. What's the problem? Well, Svalarheima just kind of does this a lot better. There's the Karhu, there's the Knees, there's other units that just kind of do his job better. MSV1 is alright, and I often find that the times where you're like, oh, but what if you want an extra gun? Usually you don't need more than 3 guns, or 4 guns if you really want to go that way, with a shock marksman rifle. It's just not really relevant the times where you actually have to use Richard Quinn as an offensive piece. At least I haven't found that point yet. And just spending that much points on just a Fusilier, I would rather just take a forward observer for 12 points. You could even take 2 for the cost of this guy. So I just wouldn't take... I think he's too expensive, and you could definitely fill him in just to have a shooting piece, but it's often kind of an overkill and an overcommitment you're doing to this strategy. Personally, Richard Quinn is a C-tier unit. He's a niche, and you can take him, and he'll be useful, but I just wouldn't normally use him that much. Now, Uma Sorensen, on the other hand, is amazing. It's an amazing profile because it's one of the only units in the entire faction with camouflage, which just makes it super useful because not only does it have camouflage, it's a specialist, and it has movement to -3 and forward deployment +8, which means that it's a pretty damn good specialist. Out of Willpower 13, one of the higher willpowers for the factions, you have a submachine gun with +1 burst. She's pretty decent at fighting as well, and the EM mines are just great. I mean, isolating targets is just pretty good in general. And this profile, when you're playing a mission that really requires these specialists like this, this is something that you'll be happy taking. I mean, she's great. Now, the other profiles, the FTO profiles, are also great because they can go in a Knees fire team, and you'll often want them because I believe they're cheaper than the basic Knees. Yes, they're 28 points, and you can have her as your lieutenant in a Knees fire team, which means she's pretty secure. And it's just a great unit, and you definitely want to take it when you can, and when you're trying to build for that kind of niche gameplay, or you really need somebody to go up there. I think I'll put it in an A. I don't put it in every list. Sometimes I just don't have the points to kind of squeeze her in. But in the list that she does goes in, she's extremely useful, so I would definitely put her in an A tier. Now, Lian Kai is a beast of a unit. This guy's insane. So, 21 points. An explosive CC weapon, CC 23, martial arts level 4, mimetism, no wound in cap, dodge +3, forward deployment. It's just an amazing dodge and berserk. It's absolutely insane of a unit. He has double templates and a flash pulse, so he can shoot from either range. It just makes him such a versatile guy. And willpower 14 as well, so if you ever need to use it, it's pretty decent. This guy is your cream of the crop in Svalarheima. I almost never run a list without him because he's just that good. He's the midfield skirmisher that you need in this faction, and it really does need it. And he feels the role way better than any of the other units that you can take do, just because his dodge is great. It's a 16 physical dodge with +1 inch. His melee is amazing. He has no wound in cap. The only problem that Lian Kai has is he dies to a shock mine. And when that happens, it's very sad. And yeah, you might think physical 16. It does happen from time to time, and you'll be disappointed. But if it doesn't happen and that number comes into play, he's crazy good. And for 21 points, you couldn't ask for a better skirmisher, honestly. He is impetuous, but that's actually an advantage for Lian Kai because you want him to move up. That is his goal, to move up into the field and attack. And I just find that he just always pays his points. He always goes over what you pay for him. And unless you run him into another melee user, which I think is just not smart, but if you play him correctly, he's just amazing. He also has super jump, so he can get basically through the terrain without any problem. And that's something you'll see in Svalarheima in general, that they all have movement abilities like climbing plus and super jump, and it really brings the faction into a kind of light that you can kind of run with. And Lian Kai, I think, exemplifies that the best. Berserk is also a skill that just is invaluable sometimes, being able to trade up with it. But yeah, Lian Kai is almost a must-take for me. I put him in every single list that I make, and sometimes I don't put him, and it's just because I took too many heavy infantry or something like that, but if I can't afford him, I will always put him in the list. What's next? Octavia Grimsdaughter. Now, let's talk about Octavia. 28-point missile launcher. This unit sucks. It's not even linkable in Svalarheima, so it's truly terrible. And unlike the factions where you can link her, I might be wrong here, but I don't think you can link her, no. Even in the factions where you can link her, she's pretty bad. Just to have a missile for 28 points, you're basically get a missile launcher, and that's what she's good for. And she's just not great. I mean, it's not even great BS. Armor 2 is just okay. You're just not taking her. There's better options. If you want a missile launcher, I mean, you put a missile launcher in a Fusilier core team, it's going to do much better than this unit. There's just no reason to take Octavia, and she's generally useless. And that goes for Octavia in almost every sectorial she's in. She's just not a useful unit. That BS attack +1 burst just like never comes up. But yeah, I would probably put her in the D tier. And if I ever make a worse units list, she might be in it. She's just not great. Her model's pretty cool though. I do like it. Now the Ninja. Now here is a interesting unit. Now Ninja, our second camouflage choice in Svalarheima, and it's alright. It's ballistic skill 11. It has climbing plus. It's 30 points for a multi-sniper element ballistic skill 11 multi-sniper rifle. That's pretty steep price you're paying, and I think you're sacrificing too much in one direction to just have this. And I think where the Ninja really shines is because your opponent doesn't expect it, because nobody is taking the Ninja. But yeah, when your opponent doesn't expect it, I think it's the one time where the Ninja really does shine. But it's a camouflage unit. It's not a specialist, so it can't press any buttons. I think the second profile with the Shock Marksman rifle is just useless. Because you have Lian Kai and you have Uma Sorensen, you just don't take this guy. There's better options than taking the Ninja. And even at Mimetism 6, you might as well just take the Noken, who is a specialist and can do other things. And yeah, he's just kind of terrible most of the time. He's a cool unit. I do love it when you do bring him and he does pop off. It feels like you just accomplished the impossible. He does have great melee, of course, he's a ninja. There's just better options, honestly. Like, you just wouldn't take him in this faction. For me, he's a D tier. Now, Agnes is an amazing unit. I love Agnes. And why is she great? Well, she's 14 points and she's a wild card. That's it. She's a wild card specialist with a nano pulsar for 14 points. It's just great. I mean, the fact is that you can put her in a beta fire team, and something that I like to do is having Agnes, Anise, and a machinist in a fire team, and now you have a pretty good ARO piece, and you have two specialists in a fire team that can move up and do things. Not only that, but the nano pulsar really brings a template that the faction really kind of likes to have, because their basic troops don't really have that kind of utility. While Agnes does kind of bring it. It's only 14 points, and not only that, if you're bringing a barg team, you could also bring Agnes. You can bring her with orcs. knees. You can bring her in the beta fire team, and she's still the cheapest option to take here. And yeah, I mean, you could even duo her with the bullets here. So yeah, she's great, honestly. And I would bring her, most of the time she's going to be in a list simply because you can take her with other units. For me, she's an A tier. Shona. Shona is another great unit in Svalarheima, and in almost every faction she's in, I mean, it's a no-one in-cap CC, armor-piercing, martial arts level 4, explosive CC weapon at 23 CC. This is obviously a monster in close combat, but not only that, but you do have Nanopulsar plus 1 burst, which makes it an excellent piece to take in fire teams. Dodge plus 3 plus 2 inches, and I think the greatest thing about her in Svalarheima is that she's a wild card, which means you can slot her into any of these link teams that you want. Like, you can take her with the knees, you can take her with the Boig or the Hospitalers. And yeah, she's often very useful, and I think one of the greatest things about Svalarheima is that they do have great CC, and she's one of the reasons why you can really say that, and she's definitely worth taking. I would probably put Shona at in somewhere around here. I would say I take her less often than these two, but she's definitely up there as a character that you would take in a list. Now, the Boig is interesting. I think people hated this guy for a bit, and I can understand why. When he came out, he wasn't linkable, but now he is linkable, and that means you have a Burst 2 rocket launcher on an Armor 5 unit with 16 dodge, physical 16, which is great. I mean, I personally love this guy. I have a soft spot for him. He's a BTS 6, hacker -3. He's pretty durable. And even in close combat, he's pretty good because he has the heavy pistol, and he still gets the +1 burst on it. The MK12 is also a great unit. You could also take the MK12. I wouldn't because of how expensive it is. At 47 points, you really are putting a big chunk of your army into him. But if you do bring him, he hasn't really failed me that much, so I think he's a good unit. Obviously not as great as some of the other units, but I would probably put him in a B tier because he has been useful in the past, and I love taking him with Agnes and Agnes or the Niece. I think this is a pretty interesting fire team you can take, or you could take him with the Knight Hospitaller as well, and that makes him pretty useful and viable. Gunner. Now, Gunner is your third bastion of CC in Svalarheima. Now, the problem with Gunner, in my opinion, is that he's 34 points. So he crosses that line where he's kind of expensive for what he does. He's only dogged, he doesn't have immunity to shock. And he does have Climbing Pulse, which is great, and Berserk plus 3 is also great. You can put him, he's a wildcard Fusilier, so you can put him in a Fusilier fire team and still keep it pure. He's a specialist, willpower 13. He's just super useful. The multi-rifle and the Shane Colt, sometimes they do come in handy. And just having that Trench Hammer weapon is just great. It's great for plummeting stuff. And he's one of the pillars of CC in Svalarheima. Although often I do find he's a third choice over Shona and Lian Kai. But sometimes you do take him. And when you do, I found that he's not disappointed me that much. Sometimes he does, but he's definitely a more niche pick than Lian Kai or Shona. So I would probably put him right here next to the Infirmer. But when you can take him, he's pretty decent. Now the Beast Hunters, I love the Beast Hunters. I think this profile is insane, and this is kind of the cheap irregular units that you really see in other armies that are completely uncommon in Pano, mainly because you have a Beast Hunter that comes with Mind Layer, Panzerfaust, AP Mines, Mimetism, amazing CC with Natural Born Warrior. I think this unit is great. At 9 points, this is a steal, and the other Beast Hunter units are also great, especially the 17 points ones. With a +1 burst heavy flamethrower, a double template heavy flamethrower can cause damage even to heavy infantry. This is a great profile that really forces your opponent to kind of trade badly, especially when he gets that forward deployment and the camouflage on him. It makes him a really interesting unit. And he's so cheap, unlike the Ninja, which costs almost double his points. It's just a cheap unit with a ton of use. And he can go into melee, he can go into template. He's great for defending your base if you take the 9 points. And he's just great for filling your list, honestly. If you do have the 9 points to spare in your list, you might as well throw him in. He's almost always useful. I think the Beast Hunter is a S tier, especially in Pano, where they don't have that many options for these kind of units. Now, Kyle Hawkins is alright. He's a Knight Hospitaller uh, with slightly better stats, but it makes him cost like 5 points more. And usually, you don't want the Knight Hospitaller to count 5 points more. You want him to be cheaper. He doesn't have a great weapon either, so there's really no point. I mean, he's a specialist, which is great, but you could take a doctor for I think 35 points. Yeah, 35 points multi rifle doctor hospitaller, slightly worse CC, but you might as well just take that. Like, you often don't want to spend that much on a Knight Hospitaller, and there's just better options. There's a clearly better version of this profile that you can take. So I just wouldn't take him, really, and I would probably put him on a D tier. Now, we are getting to some of the final guys here. Military Order Curators. Now, here is a useless unit. I really don't understand what this guy's role is. The Machinist is cheaper, and if you take the 18 points, he has Mimetism as well. And this guy really doesn't bring that. He brings AP mines, which are fine. I mean, on an engineer, it doesn't really matter to have these kind of things. And it's just not worth it, really. This guy's just not worth taking, especially when you have two better options. Actually, three better options in this sectorial to take. For me, this is going to be another D tier. Now, Maximus, our second tag. He's cool. He's cool. He's such a unique unit. I mean, just look at all the stuff he has. And not only that, he's a specialist as well. So you have a tag that's a specialist, which the pilot can get out, do some of the mission objectives. The problem is he doesn't really have a big weapon. The multi-marksman rifle plus one burst is definitely good. It's not a bad weapon, but it does suffer sometimes with its burst and its the range of it. Panzerfaust is also decent. He's great in melee, obviously. Great melee tag. And honestly, he's kind of a hidden gem of a profile. I mean, people don't usually take him, but when they do, and when I have taken him, he has been pretty useful. So I wouldn't rank him too low. I do think the Jotun is often better. You will take the Jotun over this guy, just because the Jotun has that armor 10, which is insane. Meanwhile, this guy just has armor 7. And yeah, he's great, but you don't often see him around that much. For me, Maximus is honestly, I think, more of a B tier unit. He's kind of in the same boat as around Gunner, I think, where I would take him or not. But I would definitely take the Jotun over him most time. Now the Blade Ops. Now this is one of the new units that is, I think it's really good. Honestly, because he's an engineer at 24 points with tactical awareness, immune to shock, mimetism, and most importantly, you can duo him with a Bulleteer with the Spitfire. Now this duo is amazing. You have a specialist, you have an extra order on the Bulleteer. If he ever gets down, if he ever gets hacked, you just have the engineer right there to heal him back up. And they just kind of run together like extremely well. This duo is something that I would take quite a bit, and you'll see it in other factions too, in other sectorials for Pano as well. So it's not unique to Svalarheima, but it's still great, and sometimes you do want to take it anyways. It's just a great duo. You have a fast-moving Bulleteer with a Spitfire, and a Blade behind it to back it up and to push any buttons that it needs to. For that reason, I really do think if you're taking the Bulleteer, you're taking the Blade Operative most of the times. He's just that good. Oh, here's the Locust, by the way. I found him. Locust... Yeah, I think he's kind of a D-tier unit, honestly. It's just not worth taking. And yeah, that's the list. So tell me what you think about it. I just kind of did this out of the blue. This is just my opinion on it. I obviously would like to hear about what you guys have to say and what you guys would love to see. Tell me any of your units and why I'm wrong and why you think they're good, or why you can prove to me that they're great. And yeah, any recommendations. If you'd like to see this content, let me know, send a comment. And yeah, thanks for watching.